Hello, my name is Pastor Kathy Kollar. I'm the pastor of Pleasant Valley Lutheran Church near Malabar Farm State Park and St. Paul Lutheran Church in Lucas, Ohio. Greetings. We are reading through the Bible with commentary, and we are in a new book of the Bible. We are in Ezra. And I've been reading through the summary and the information about the book before I start into it. And Ezra and Nehemiah, of course, lots of discussion by all the scholars. Biblical scholars love to discuss and argue about all of these things. One of them is, what year were these written and what year are they set? And were Ezra and Nehemiah originally one book, or were they originally two books? Well, they've come down to us as two books, but there's a lot of kind of duplication between Ezra and Nehemiah. They're very much two books that go together, and they're set at the time when the Jewish people had been exiled to Babylon and had been there for about 70 years, and the Persians came to power, and King Cyrus, king of Persia, came to power in 539, and he reigned till 530. So for 9 years BC that he reigned, and he allowed the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem and build a temple to their God. And it wasn't so much that he became Jewish as that he supported the people in his empire going to their own home, worshiping their own God, in hopes that that would make them, they would like him and they would be amenable to being part of the kingdom, part of the empire, because the empire allowed them to go back home again, and that they would be compliant and easy and agree with having the Persians over top of them. So we hear a lot about the temple in Ezra, and we'll hear about the wall being built around Jerusalem in Nehemiah. But basically it's these waves of people returning from Babylon to Jerusalem. Not everybody came back. Actually, when Israel became a nation after World War II, there was a whole group of Jewish people who were coming from the east, from what used to be Babylon, which is now Iran and Iraq and that whole area over there. And they were known as the Ashkenazi, I'm going to say that wrong, Jews. Very Eastern Jewish, very different kind of Jewish than the European or the American Jews. But they had been there literally since the Babylonian exile. Not everybody came back. But we're going to read about Ezra and Nehemiah and the people that came back on the first wave. So Ezra chapter 1, verse 1. In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, in order that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia, so that he sent a herald throughout all his kingdom, and also in a written edict he declared. So apparently the edict was originally written in Aramaic, and the writer of Ezra says it's because Jeremiah had made this prophecy, then this is what's going to happen. Verse 2, Thus says King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem and Judah. Any of those among you who are of his people, may their God be with them, are now permitted to go up to Jerusalem in Judah and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. Let all survivors, in whatever place they reside, be assisted by the people of their place with silver and gold, with goods and with animals, besides freewill offerings for the house of God in Jerusalem. So they're allowed to go back, and anybody else is encouraged to give them gifts to take with them. Verse 5, The heads of the families of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred, got ready to go up and rebuild the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. All their neighbors aided them with silver vessels, with gold, with goods, with animals, and with valuable gifts, besides all that was freely offered. King Cyrus himself brought out the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and placed in the house of his gods. So when the Babylonians had come and deported everybody, they took anything of value from the temple, but they weren't all melted down. And so many of the original things from the original temple are being brought back with them to Jerusalem. Verse 8. King Cyrus of Persia had them released into the charge of Mithridath, the treasurer, who counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this was the inventory: gold basins 30, silver basins 1,000, knives 29, gold bowls 30, other silver bowls 410, other vessels 1,000. The total of the gold and silver vessels was 5,400. All these Sheshbazzar brought up with the exiles when the exiles were brought up from Babylonia to Jerusalem. So the new temple that's about to get built, which will be known as the Second Temple, will have in it utensils, bowls, dishes, things from the first temple, which is great continuity. Chapter 2. Now these were the people of the province who came from those captive exiles whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had carried captive to Babylonia. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, all to their own towns. And now we have lots of names, and we're going to have a lot of these same names when we get to the book of Nehemiah. They came with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, Seraiah, Reelaiah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mizpar, Bigvai, Rehum, and Baanah. The number of the Israelite people, the descendants of Parosh, 2,172, of Shephatiah, 372, of Arah, 775, of Pahath Moab, namely the descendants of Jeshua and Joab, 2,812, of Elam, 1,254, of Zartu, 945, of Zakkai, 760, of Bani, 642, of Bebai, 623, of Asgad, 1,222, of Adonikam, 666, of Bigvai, 2,056, of Adin, 454, of Ater, namely of Hezekiah, 98, of Bezai, 323, of Jorah, 112, of Hashem, 223, of Gibbar, 95, of Bethlehem, 123, the people of Nephtoah, 56, of Anathoth, 128, the descendants of Asmaveth, 42, of Kiriath Aram, Chephirah, and Beeroth, 743, of Ramah and Geba, 621, the people of Michmas, 122, of Bethel and Ai, 223, the descendants of Nebo, 52, of Magbish, 156, of the other Elam, 1,254. It's so fun to have the other Elam, just because we know how that is. You have a city, and it's got, these are all different cities that we're hearing how many people were coming back. So Bethlehem, 123. Bethlehem is not a big city to start with, and 123 people are coming back to it. But the other Elam, just like you might have Washington and the other Washington, and there are many, many place names that have, there's more than one of them. So the Elam and the other Elam, 1,254, of Harim, 320, of Lod, Hadid, and Ono, 725, of Jericho, 345, of Sanaa, 3,630. Verse 36, the priests, the descendants of Judea, of the house of Jeshua, 973, of Immer, 1,052, of Pashur, 1,247, of Harim, 1,017. Verse 40, the Levites, the descendants of Jeshua and Kadmiel, of the descendants of Hodaviah, 74. Not very many Levites, and there's footnotes about why might there have been so few Levites, and possibly not very many of them were exiled to begin with. Maybe they didn't want to come back. Maybe there just weren't that many to start with. Verse 41, the singers, the descendants of Asaph, 128, the descendants of the gatekeepers, and those are the ones who are the guards and take care to make sure that the temple is well maintained, of Shalom, of Ater, of Talmon, of Akub, of Hatita, of Shobai, in all 139. Verse 43, the temple servants, the descendants of Ziha, Hasupha, Tabeath, Kiros, Siaha, Padan, Lebana, Hagabah, Akub, Hagab, Shamlai, Hanan, Gidel, Gehar, Re'ah, Rezin, Nekoda, Gazam, Uzzah, Paseah, Besai, Asna, Meunim, Nephisim, Bakbuk, Hakufa, Harhur, Bazluth, Mahida, Harsha, Barkos, Sisera, Tema, Naziza, and Haptiphah. I really was hoping that when we got done with Chronicles that we would be done with lists of names, but no, we will have many more names yet to go with Ezra and Nehemiah, because this is a record of all the people that are coming back, and whoever wrote Ezra had access to documents and included the information that they had. So that whole list was the descendants of those people were the temple servants. Verse 55, the descendants of Solomon's servants, Sotai, Hasophereth, Peruda, Jaala, Darkon, Giddel, Shephatiah, Hartil, Pokereth-Hazabaim, and Ami. Verse 58, all the temple servants and the descendants of Solomon's servants were 392. Verse 59, the following were those who came up from Telmekah, Telharsha, Cherub, Adon, and Immer, though they could not prove their families or their descent, whether they belonged to Israel. The descendants of Delaiah, Tobiah, and Nekoda, 652. Also the descendants of the priests, the descendants of Hebeah, Hazkoz, and Barzillai, who had married one of the daughters of Barzillai the Gileadite, and who was called by their name. These looked for their entries in the genealogical records, but they were not found there, and so they were excluded from the priesthood as unclean. The governor told them that they were not to partake of the most holy food until there should be a priest to consult, Urim and Thummim. And this is part of why all these names were important. They're not super important to us, but they were very important to the people at the time that these were written, because they were basically saying, are you an Israelite? Can you prove that you're an Israelite? Do you know your ancestry? Because if you can trace it back to one of these people, you can trace it all the way back to Adam, and you are definitely in. And now there's this whole group of priests who cannot trace their ancestry back through these genealogies. And so they're being told, you cannot partake of the food, you cannot be a fully functioning priest until we consult Urim and Thummim, which were some kind of way of looking to find out what God's will was. They call it casting lots, and it was, we don't know what it was. Somehow these two things, and when they threw the two things or used the two things, they were able, it's kind of like using a magic 8-ball and seeing what it says, or who draws the short straw, or eeny, meeny, miny, mo, or all kinds of different ways that we randomly pick somebody. In the same way, somehow they used Urim and Thummim to determine what was God's will. So they are saying, okay, so for these priests who could not trace their ancestry all the way back, they were going to have to go before the Lord and find out whether the Lord would say, yes, they can still be priests, or no, they were out. We don't know how that was done, but we do know that it was a way of determining God's will. Verse 64, the whole assembly together was 42,360, besides their male and female servants, of whom there were 7,337. And they had 200 male and female singers. They had 736 horses, 245 mules, 435 camels, and 6,720 donkeys. So somebody is keeping track and getting ready for this huge group of people, 42,000 plus servants. So we're talking, with the people and animals and everything, almost 50,000 creatures heading from Babylon back to Jerusalem. Verse 68, as soon as they came to the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, some of the heads of families made free will offerings for the house of God, to erect it on its site. According to their resources, they gave to the building fund 61,000 derricks of gold, 5,000 minas of silver, 100 priestly robes. And I'm not sure exactly how much that is. The footnote I read is basically it was a lot. They gave a lot of silver and gold and priestly robes. Verse 70, the priests, the Levites, and some of the people lived in Jerusalem and its vicinity, and the singers, the gatekeepers, and the temple servants lived in their towns, and all Israel in their towns. So some people came back to Jerusalem, but some people went back, like we read about Bethlehem, and the people went back to Bethlehem. Chapter 3. When the 7th month came, and the Israelites were in the towns, the people gathered together in Jerusalem. Then Jeshua, son of Jozadak, with his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, with his kin, set out to build the altar of the God of Israel, to offer burnt offerings on it, as prescribed in the law of Moses, the man of God. They set up the altar on its foundation, because they were in dread of the neighboring peoples, and they offered burnt offerings upon it to the Lord morning and evening. And they kept the festival of booths as prescribed, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number, according to the ordinance as required for each day. And after that, the regular burnt offerings, the offerings at the new moon, and all of the sacred festivals of the Lord, and the offerings of everyone who made a free will offering to the Lord. From the first day of the 7th month they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, but the foundation of the temple of the Lord was not yet laid. So they gave money to the masons and the carpenters, and food and drink and oil to the Sidonians and the Tyrians, to bring cedar trees from Lebanon to the sea, to Joppa, according to the grant that they had from King Cyrus of Persia. So they got back. They did not immediately start, but after they'd been there for a little bit and settled in, they gathered together everybody. They followed Festival of Booths, also known as Sukkoth, a fall festival of harvest where you live in a tent or a booth of some sort, and it lasts like a week. So during that whole time they made the offerings. The temple's not built yet, but they built the altar and they've started doing the sacrifices. And after Sukkoth was over, they continued doing morning and night sacrifices and all of the sacrifices they're supposed to be doing. Verse 8. In the 2nd year after their arrival in the house of God at Jerusalem, in the 2nd month, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, son of Jozadak, made a beginning, together with the rest of the people, the priests and the Levites, and all who had come to Jerusalem from the captivity. They appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to have the oversight of the work of the house of the Lord. And Jeshua, with his sons and his kin, and Kadmiel and his sons, Binnui and Hodaviah, along with the sons of Henadad, the Levites, their sons and kin, together took charge of the workers in the house of God. So they've been doing the sacrifices. Now they're going to actually build the temple. Verse 10, when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments were stationed to praise the Lord with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, according to the directions of King David of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever toward Israel. So when we get to the book of Psalms, we will hear that song and others. And all the people responded with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of families, old people who had seen the first house on its foundations, wept with a loud voice when they saw this house, though many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shout from the sound of the people's weeping. For the people shouted so loudly that the sound was heard far away. So a huge amount of praise, but also of tears, because the older people who could remember the first temple and how magnificent it was and how awesome it was, and now the second temple is being built and they see the foundation and they're weeping. And many people are praising God and people are weeping, and it's quite a noisy time. And so tomorrow We will read about the resistance that some of the neighbors did not like the idea of them rebuilding the temple to God. So the temple's not built yet, but the sacrifices are happening, because the more important thing is to do the sacrifice even if you don't have the building. So they are doing the sacrifices, and now they're building the building, and that is, we will hear more about that in our next session. Application. We now have lots of church buildings that we use, and those buildings also can often use donations. And it is important to give our tithe and give our offerings to support our church, whatever church your church may be, because there is always heat bill to be paid, electric bill to be paid, pastors to be paid. And we are to give offerings to the house of God, wherever your house of God might be. I encourage you to consider how you can support and care for your house of God. And if you don't have the money, but then there's always things to do to maintain the house of God, are there not? So there's always volunteers needed for weeding and cleaning and doing all of the work of taking care of the house of God. So I encourage you to do that today. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord look at you with favor and give you peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace. Like, subscribe, comment. We will see you again next time. Thanks so much for being here.